main buckets. The first being the impact of social insurance and public assistance programs on individuals, focusing on outcomes as disparate as public pensions and retirement, the effect of public assistance on family structure, and this new project that I'll talk a little bit about that I've been focusing on the last year, which is going to look at the life cycle impacts of cash transfers to needy children on subsequent outcomes throughout the rest of their life. And I have another strand of research focusing on the factors that shape the scope and generosity of the U.S. safety net, typically looking at how policy is set at the local and state level. But before I get into projects, I'd just like to talk a little bit more about what I've done the past year. The chapter 1 of my dissertation, my previous job market paper, is now revise and resubmit. I've also given a number of talks at various conferences, including the Midwest Economics Association, Northwestern Economic History Rookie Fest, and I gave a talk over in the economics department. And I've obtained access to the Federal Statistical Research Data Center downstairs for this long-run public assistance project, and also have a Social Security Administration grant pending. So I've definitely gotten out and about around ISR, which has been an amazing opportunity for me being at PSC. And I have this new working paper on public assistance of family structure. And I'd just like to acknowledge the research support that PSC has generously provided, including the Marshall Weinberg PSC Small Grant, which facilitated some data entry, and I hired my first RA, which was an exciting experience. And then there's also been various funding through PSC research funds and research support funds, and shout out to the UN Postdoc Association as well for support for some of these things. So this first project, focusing on public pensions and retirement, is motivated in large part by this time series figure showing the decline in elderly male labor force participation, 65 and older, over the 20th century. And naturally, this increase in retirement has been studied by many demographers and economists and other social scientists. This paper contributes to this by focusing on one particular reform, which created the first public pension for non-governmental employees in the United States. So I focus on the Railroad Retirement Act, which nationalized over 80 plus private pension systems, unifying them all under a single plan. And the new pensions greatly increased the incentives to retire at age 65. So I focus on how these changes to pension incentives impacted retirement. And the findings show that the Railroad Retirement Act was important in driving retirement increases when it occurred in the 1930s, but it also provides us with evidence on the proximate causes of increased retirement in the 1950s as well, which was a key decade for Social Security in which the program became truly universal. And the paper also provides some of the first empirical evidence on the importance of earlier pension incentives at age 70 in driving the spike in retirement before the New Deal. Moving on to this new working paper and my current job market paper for this year. This paper focuses on public assistance for two-parent families and family structure. So it's motivated in part by this time series graph, which shows essentially the increase in number of men reporting being separated who are ever married, and the number of men who report not living with their children and the mother of their children. And in the dashed lines, we see that these rates have always been higher and are getting higher among men who report being currently unemployed. So in terms of what the project actually does, I leverage variation in which states had access to this program, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, Unemployed Parents, which was a means-tested cash assistance program for unemployed heads of families, and it operated very similarly to what we all know, the broader unemployment insurance program. And so this project leverages CPS ASEC data between 1968 to 1988. And I find that this program provided meaningful protection against unemployment-associated divorce and separation and non-cohabitation that would have occurred otherwise. And so this suggests the effects of expanding UI to currently ineligible groups might have far-reaching implications for how American families respond to long-term unemployment. And this issue has come to the fore during COVID, when we saw that the normal UI program misses quite a bit of the unemployed in the US, and which renewed proposals and calls for making the program fully federal so that so many people don't slip through the cracks. Okay, and this also helps to explain some of the historical relationship in these trends. So moving on to the new project that I've started over the past year at PSC. This project's focus is estimating the impact of childhood cash transfer receipt on later life outcomes ranging across the life cycle, including earnings, disability status, program participation, and longevity. So, of course, if you're going to look at longevity, you need to study a reform that happened quite a while ago. And I examined the early years of the ADC program, which was, again, the largest cash transfer program in the 20th century United States. And so this analysis combines the introduction of this program to almost 1 million children in the late 1930s with recent advances down in the FSRDC, in which you can link the 1940 census to numerous data sets in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, including the CPS, ASEC, SIP, censuses, some Social Security Administration files, the ACS, and basically anything that you can think of. So as you can imagine, that data set takes a while to build, and so I'm still building this data set, but really excited to see what results come from it. So thank you so much for your time and listening today, and I look forward to connecting. You can find me at my website or at my email, mpesner@umech.edu. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Matt. Matt is a puzzle pro. If anybody hasn't been in the PSC director's office in a while, we have a lot of puzzles going, and what you want to do is just try to get there before Matt has gotten on one of those puzzles, because I can see this, you're on Zoom. Hi, everybody. We missed you. We have a fruit salad, so you can't enjoy it.
Cookies the size of plates.
Cookies the size of plates.
Yeah.
Wonder if these are how they train the frisbee dog in the halftime to
That's
the
right.
house, you know?
That's right. Photo frisbee dog training.
Yeah.
And I want to get rid of. So it's just. Still.
You know what? Let's just go with that. Come on over, Josh. Take us into the next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Josh Good. I'm a second year on the postdoc. I assume I'm okay to start, yes, Sarah?
Absolutely.
Okay, sorry. I might have gotten a little too excited there. Yeah, so anyway, I'm starting my second year on the postdoc. I actually wasn't able to participate in this event last year because I was right in the middle of my move to Ann Arbor. So I'm really excited to be here. I received my PhD in sociology from the University of Colorado in 2022. And I actually have a little bit of history with ISR. I was actually an intern in the summer undergraduate internship at ICPSR back in 2014, I believe, somewhere in the 20. And so this is me and my colleagues on the internship. And then I actually returned to ISR a few years later to serve as a TA in the summer program at ICPSR, so that was kind of cool. So when it came time to choose kind of where I wanted to apply for a postdoc, you know, my first choice was clear. I wanted to be near Blumpy Burger in Ann Arbor. And I happened to realize, oh, hey, ISR is there too. Like, what a perfect setup. Of course, I'm only kidding. I'm humbled and honored to be here, and I still, admittedly, every day when I pass that sign up front, I still get very excited and admittedly a little bit intimidated. So, kind of today, I just want to provide a really kind of broad overview of what I'm interested in, what I'm doing. So, the first thing I'll kind of tell you about is my research interests. So, if you were to ask me what I love, the first thing I would tell you is quantitative methods. Absolutely love quantitative methods. I love the methodological puzzles. I think there's maybe nothing finer in the world than sitting down to code the start of a study, throwing out some new kids on the block, rocking out and writing code. So I really enjoy that. And actually, it's kind of related to this. I had the opportunity to work as a stats consultant at the Institute of Behavioral Science when I was in Colorado, so that was really cool.
Is New Kids on the Block the name of the data set?
It should be. Yeah, it should be, right? Okay. Sorry, that's really unsettling. The other thing, kind of a piece that's newer for me in my research is the idea of biosocial integration. So I did a little bit of work with biomarkers in my dissertation, and I was also a T32 trainee with Dr. Jason Boardman when I was in Colorado. But this has really been kind of the focus for me on the postdoc is getting experience with epigenetic methods. So another thing that I really like to work with is health. So I published a handful of papers when I was in graduate school on like health lifestyles in childhood and adolescence, some other health behavior related things we did, work on technology use amongst children and kind of the implications for sleep, physical play, and those sorts of things. I'm really interested in the life course. This is something that I think is kind of always in my mind whenever I'm thinking about work. It's not something that I'm necessarily doing a lot of work with explicitly or haven't in the past, but I am now, which is really exciting. And finally, family demography. So this is something that I tend to enjoy. I haven't done as much work with it as I maybe would like. My first paper was actually in demography and looked at family complexity, and then I did see this in my dissertation, although I'm not really doing much with it currently. This is a recent publication that came out this year. This is with Pat Kruger, who's at the University of Colorado, Denver. And so this was just looking at how work hours and having children are associated with time and health activities, specifically hours spent sleeping and engaged in moderate or vigorous physical activity. Some of the things that I'm currently working on is this project that I don't know about you guys, but when I'm in the middle of a project, coming up with some sort of title is always a challenge. So they're very vanilla and kind of boring. Although maybe some of us think that's how the title should be. But so this is adverse childhood experiences and accelerated aging, a structured life course model. So basically what we're doing here is we're using the future of families and child well-being, formerly known as fragile families and child well-being, or FFCW, data to look at accelerated aging at age 15. And so accelerated aging is basically this measure that we use from DNA methylation data that essentially tells us whether somebody's aging like faster than they kind of should be for their chronological age or slower, if that makes sense. And so we're using a number of these, you heard them referred to as epigenetic clocks. You know, these are kind of becoming big in the popular press a little bit. I see them in the news. And so we're essentially looking at that. At age 15, we're using like different adverse childhood experiences that kids may have experienced at ages 1, 3, 5, 9, and 1, 3, 5, and 9. And so to do this, the thing that I think is kind of cool, we're using a structured life course modeling approach, or SLCMA. If you've heard of that, so this allows you to formally test sensitive periods, accumulation, and recency in our case. So that's kind of cool. Another project that I'm working on is childhood food insecurity and accelerated aging. Also creatively titled, once again, a structured life course model. This is really similar to the previous project that I mentioned. Again, using accelerated aging from the epigenetic clocks and looking at food insecurity as the predictor at ages 1, 3, 5, and 9. Another thing that I've been working on is a literature review, like kind of a scoping review, which has been really fun. This is the first time I've done something like this. It's been a really cool learning process. And basically what we're doing is we're looking at studies that use DNA methylation and look at some sort of internalizing or externalizing behaviors and disorders in children. So we started with, I don't even remember how many initial papers in our search, whittled it down to 141 currently, and we're kind of finishing up that initial coding of the data. So we should be able to start looking at that soon. So that's really exciting. And this is actually where several of my colleagues on this are postbacks. And so this project has been a lot of fun, kind of getting to provide a little bit of that sort of mentorship to some of the young folks, which I really enjoy. The last thing that I'll mention here is epigenetic mechanisms of pubertal development. And actually, I'll talk a little bit more in detail about this just because there's a lot of pieces to it. So in this project, what we're actually looking at, we're trying to ask kind of broadly, how is puberty associated with DNA methylation? So you can imagine like on a very large scale, there's kind of three possibilities, right? On one hand, it might be the case that puberty is kind of turned on, if you will, by DNA methylation. It may be the case that instead DNA methylation kind of changes after puberty, so it's more of a residue, or alternatively, they may develop concurrently. And kind of the pieces of this project that we're looking at, we're doing an epigenome-wide association study, or an EWAS. We're constructing a DNA methylation surrogate, and then we're also doing kind of a separate piece of this that we'll be looking at those who undergo early puberty and how that's associated with age acceleration. So I keep talking about DNA methylation and epigenetics. So just broadly, how do we define this? I'm sure most folks know that the genome is basically your complete assembly of DNA. This is kind of what makes you unique, right? The epigenome, on the other hand, are the compounds that attach to DNA. I like to think of these as sort of a light switch for your genes that turn them on or off, right? The other way I kind of make these distinctions in my head, because I like things simple, I guess, is that I think of the genome as basically a giant cookbook. And then the epigenome is kind of like the chef who's dictating what gets cooked, right? Because one of the primary functions of the epigenome is basically cell differentiation. So every cell in your body has the capability to become a lot of different things. The epigenome is what distinguishes, whether that something becomes a brain cell or a fat cell or something like that, right? But it also turns out that although that's the primary function, we also know that the epigenome changes in response to various exposures. And so DNA methylation is what I primarily been working with. This is one of several epigenetic markers that we look at. This is basically just a methyl group attaching to a DNA. That's the sort of light switch that I mentioned. And again, this causes expression or repression of genes. And so what we know is that there's different kinds of exposures that are associated with DNA methylation, right? So stress, environmental factors, things like that. And DNA methylation in turn is associated with a number of different outcomes, be they diseases, developmental outcomes, things like that. So this is the Institute of Social Research. You're sitting out there, you're saying, who cares, Josh? Well, I would argue that we all ought to care a little bit, right? Because exposures, as many of us know, are socially patterned. So that's really important. And so I think this sort of work has the potential to help us understand how social factors influence health, right? So what are some of these pathways? These are typically measured using microarrays, generally from Illumina, everything I've worked with. And so in the case of like Illumina 450K, this measures 450,000 different loci on the genome for methylation. In the case of the EPIC array, it measures 850,000 loci. So in this project, I'm going to kind of glance over this very quickly. We're looking at the pubertal development scale. So this is basically 5 items for boys and 5 items for girls with some overlap. So both boys and girls are asked about their growth spurt, their body hair, and skin changes. They're asked basically on a 4-point scale, has this not yet started? Is it barely started? Is it like fully underway, or is it completed? And then the last 2 in each group differ. So for girls, we have breast growth and menarche, and for boys, we have voice change and facial hair. And essentially, we can calculate the PDS value as just the mean of these items. We're also working with what we refer to as PDS age, which you can think of basically as kind of the mean of participants, the mean age of people who have the same pubertal development, if that makes sense. And so there's a lot going on here, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this is an EWAS of those different puberty items individually that I talked about. So if you look at the figure on your left, the kind of Venn diagram over there, these are the different items for girls. And so I don't know that you can actually see that back there, but if you look in the very center of that figure, we see that there are 283 probes or loci on the genome that are actually significantly associated with all 5 of these items, which we thought was kind of cool. And you can see that we have a lot of what we call hits or significant associations for like menarche, for example, which is in the lower left. So these figures, essentially the lighter the blue, the more hits are in that group. And so then this figure over here on the right kind of takes and breaks that Venn diagram out into the kind of pairwise overlaps, and also includes the aggregate PDS measure. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and skip over the boys, because who likes boys anyway? One of the other things we're looking to do is construct a DNA methylation surrogate. So basically having the ability to predict pubertal age from DNA methylation using elastic net regression. I won't go into the details of that. And just kind of wrapping up, I kind of tried to think about my trajectory in the postdoc, kind of where I'm at now, where I'm going very broadly. So in the past year, really, if you were to ask me what I've done, I've learned a lot about molecular biology. I've learned some machine learning techniques, and I've learned how to think about what is commonly called big data. I don't know that I like that label, but everybody seems to like, you know, it's a commonly used phrase. So this year, kind of going forward, what I want to focus on are kind of publishing some of these studies that I've talked about. I'm also applying for a kangaroo grant, K99ROO, that will kind of largely focus on getting more formalized training in the kind of aforementioned molecular biology and machine learning. And then also work on developing some sort of new research projects. I've got some ideas for thinking about DNA methylation longitudinally, geospatially, things like that. So it could be kind of cool. And to infinity and beyond. So, you know, going forward, my plan is that if I don't receive the Kangaroo Award, I've kind of lined up, Coulter Mitchell has graciously offered to support me for a kind of a second postdoc for a third year here. And hopefully someday down the road, I will find a job. So, thank you very much.
Anybody else doesn't know what an elastic net regression is, you're not the only one. So we will have to ask Josh.
Hi, everyone. So I'm kind of an imposter here right now. I'm an incoming postdoc under the NIA T32 grant, but I'm actually still finishing up my PhD over at UCLA within the Department of Community Sciences. But PSC was still so generous to still consider me and allow me to start a little later. My mentors over the next 2 years are going to be Dr. Sarah Burgard and Dr. Yasmin Kusnoki. So I think Josh mentioned he has a connection with ISR from before. I do as well. I went to University of Michigan for my undergrad and did a little bit of research as a really like a naive, unaware research assistant with the iPair lab in my undergrad for a couple months. And then I really luckily got connected during my master's of public health with Dr. Yasmin Kusnoki actually, and worked on a mixed methods project with her within one of my initial research interests, which was on Arab American and Muslim American health. And then that kind of is what inspired me to pursue my PhD at UCLA with a focus in community health sciences and a minor in sociology that focused on migration and health of South Asian, North African, and Middle Eastern communities. And over there, I was also connected with the Population Studies Center, like their equivalent of the Population Study Center. So the California Center for Population Research and NICHD T32 pre-doc. So I kind of already touched a little bit on some of my research interests. I just want to say it's kind of really incredible to see how like the second years in the first year of their postdoc have really emerged with these like really incredible projects. My overview is just going to be kind of a lot more brief in comparison. So generally speaking, my interests are in migration and related structural determinants to migration and health. So such as like how do immigration policies affect health? How do different pathways of migration or contexts of exit from sending nations affect health? And also how do contexts of reception, so like immigrant resettlement, how do those factors shape the health of first and second generation immigrants? My second area of interest focuses more specifically on the immigrant populations from the MENA and South Asian nations, and more specifically on women and their sexual and reproductive health, and also on xenophobia and racism within this population, which is typically more commonly known as Islamophobia. And then my last main research interest falls under this arena of women's health and globally in predominantly Muslim nations. And my main interest would fall under like the region of South Asia and their health in terms of their maternal and child health and sexual and reproductive health. So within the area of migration and structural determinants of health, some projects that I've been involved in while being a PhD candidate at UCLA is the BRAVE study, which is led by Dr. Mesa Dinarasset. This study looks at physical, sexual, and mental health of undocumented Latino and Asian immigrants in California. And the studies that I've been primarily involved with is a study that looks on overall, is one of the first studies to look at overall sexual and reproductive healthcare outcomes among undocumented immigrants. And then also a study in which I looked at trying to validate this person-centered family planning care scale for an undocumented immigrant population. Then another study that I've been working on, and this is more specifically one of the papers or chapters in my dissertation, is how does citizenship status and race affect contraceptive use? So this study I'm conducting using doing a secondary data analysis of the California Health Interview Survey, and really kind of looking at how these intersectional identities that have implications at the structural level impact immigrant preferences and use and access to contraceptive care. So my dissertation is kind of funky in that I chose what's called, like, we call it the 3-paper method. So 2 of my papers are very related and one of them is different, which is the one that I just mentioned. My other 2 papers focuses more specifically on Middle Eastern, North African, and South Asian immigrants. And in this paper, I'm looking at how do neighborhood contexts shape health access among MENA and South Asian immigrants, specifically in California. So in this, I'm kind of trying to understand different aspects of immigrant resettlement patterns. So like the type of ethnic neighborhoods that they might resettle in, whether they, the geographic dimensions of their neighborhood, the economic dimensions, social implications of living in those neighborhoods, and identify whether there are certain patterns that have come up in different pockets of communities where MENA and South Asian Americans are really well settled. And if so, can I develop some sort of a typology from that? And if that is the case, can that be applied to better understanding health of these groups at the population level? And then I list this as current research because I think this is still my passion and something that would be an ongoing investigation while I'm in my postdoc. But the study that I worked on with Dr. Kusunoki on Arab American women's health, I would like to get back into that and do some more it has both qualitative and quantitative data, and I'd really want to get back into the qualitative piece of the study and understanding reproductive autonomy within these communities. And then finally, in terms of the more global dimensions of my research, I was involved in doing secondary data analysis with one of my favorite mentors, right, Dr. Randall Kuhn. He really guided me in developing the study on understanding the plights of left behind women within this migration context in global area. So this is within this context of Bangladesh, where migration is very common and leaving families behind is actually quite common. So I was really interested in understanding in an area where maternal and child health is such an important issue, and there's been so much economic and health development in this area. How about these families that are left behind? How does whether it's the economic implications of having a transnational family or the social implications of having a transnational family member, how does that affect your access to maternal health care? And so this paper was actually recently published in BMC Pregnancy and Childbirth. And then one of my colleagues, Dr. Heidi West now, because she just started her position at a CSU actually. We have a paper as well under review in demography that looks more at the different dimensions of empowerment among these women who are left behind when their spouses migrate abroad. So this kind of really, I would say, because I've been so focused on my dissertation, it's been a little hard to figure out, like, what do I want to do next? But I think a lot of it will really branch out of some of the things I've already done, or those are very, I would say, grounding points for my next, I'd say next chapters in my research journey. So one of my key interests, I think, moving forward is going to be really delving deeper into really understanding how Islamophobia affects health and like the mechanisms that are maybe related to existing conceptual models on how racism affects health. I'm really interested in understanding how do we conceptualize Islamophobia differently than how we just conceptualize racism and xenophobia more generally, and how can we measure Islamophobia, not just at the interpersonal level, but also in like organizational levels within the community, and also more in the structural level. How can we actually measure the implications of whether it's policies or practices of surveillance or whatnot. I'm also interested in delving deeper into how Islamophobia negatively may impact MENA and South Asian access to healthcare in regard to their physical, reproductive, and mental health. And understanding Islamophobia from an intersectional lens. For example, how may Islamophobia shape the health of Muslim women specifically, since there are intersectional identities laced with a religious or perceived religious identity. And then also, I wanted to bring in my understanding of neighborhood context to add more nuance to this understanding of how Islamophobia may affect health, or how we are able to, or whether we are able to detect the effects of Islamophobia on health using existing data, since currently, A, there isn't really much research on this subject area generally, and two, often the existing research might not find significant findings, or may offer kind of some mixed or inconclusive findings. But my kind of theory is that this might have largely to do with not a deeper understanding of how these immigrant groups are different than once racial and ethnic minorities that we do know more and have worked more with, and do know more about because of the existing literature. And we also don't know so much about their neighborhood and social context. In terms of more specifically MENA and South Asian migration and how stepping away from Islamophobia, I'm also interested in looking at intergenerational factors that might affect their health, parent and families, and also looking at like just their health over the life course. And then I did get the wave to kind of close off, so I'm just going to quickly go over some things that I just want to do in my time at PSC over the next 2 years, just build relationships with potential academic and community collaborators at U of M through like the different schools, and then also tap into existing research networks that focus on MENA health, and also build community partnerships within the Southeast Michigan area, since this is a great place to be studying Arab American South Asian health. I would also like to explore basically the various data sources that I didn't get to explore during my PhD. And I would also like to apply for early investigator grants and try to start positioning myself to be doing my own data collection.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And I know many of you have been following the debates about MENA measurement in the census, so that's going to be something I think a lot of us are thinking about going forward. I'm not going to give your presentation.
Okay,
Shane.
I didn't want to go.
Don't worry.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shane. I'm just going to actually get right into the little bio thing here. I'm actually from Macomb County, grew up about an hour and 15 minutes away from here. So it's good to be home and be around my family and people and everything. For what it's worth, I'm first gen, and I say that because I'm a sociologist by training, and unionization, labor rights were always a dinner table discussion. And so that was really my first exposure to social inequality, leading me to this path here. And in and out of the academy, in between degrees, I have some nonprofit experience, working in environmental justice, and then a couple of homeless shelters, advocating for people experiencing homelessness and getting them signed up with Medicaid. And so that's kind of led me to studying disability. In terms of my training, I have a health sciences background. I thought that I was going to be a physical therapist at one point, but I took this community health course in undergrad, and the rest is history. But I also have a public health background, focusing on largely international development, and then earned a medical sociology PhD at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where I focused on disability and human rights in particular. And this is actually my second postdoc. I was at USC School of Gerontology. And so I'm hoping to extend what I did there here with Philippa Clark as my mentor, doing cross-national disability research for the most part. And so I have a few publications on my record. Immigrant health is also a secondary line of research for me. And I'm also now just getting into more of the global health stuff in terms of publications. But I wanted to go over a snapshot, if you will, of a couple of projects I have. This first one here is my dissertation paper, which is going to be published any day now. So please keep your eyes peeled. But I want to give you a little sneak peek here. If you are familiar with disability theory, there's a lot of emphasis on the social model of disability, this idea that people with disabilities are minorities and experience barriers and limitations. But the Western literature largely focuses on this disability models continuum, meaning that disability historically has been seen through this moral model. It's a sort of a sinful thing. Your father was a thief, so that's why you're disabled, for example. And through the medical innovation and medical infrastructure, particularly in Western societies, disability has taken on this medical model that an individual must be fixed by a medical professional, leading to the social model, which is more of a 20th, 21st century ideal type. However, this is largely informed by Western literature and social change and demographic transitions in Western contexts. So co-authors and I argue that disability regimes in the,
It's not your fault.
it's not my fault, okay. But can I move?
But can you move it? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. But disability regimes in the global South, which I'll share this with you if you want to see the whole thing. But essentially, we argue that moralization and medicalization of disability exist at different levels in different parts of the world. And so we have three ideal types that we do test for our countries: Kenya, an integrative regime; India, a moral regime; and you can't really see here, but Nicaragua, a civic regime. And in the interest of time, we do find differences in social inclusion, and therefore we argue that there are disability regimes in the global South that exist outside of this Western informed continuum. Also, recently published, I did some work with some co-authors on, let me preface this, the immigrant health disparity literature is largely focused on individuals of Mexican, Caribbean, or East Asian origins. For a good reason, a lot of immigrants come to the United States from those areas. But there's other immigrant groups in the United States. This is a country of immigrants, essentially, right? So with the NHIS, so Angu, this has your name written all over it. The NHIS has this really cool variable of region of origin. And we wanted to explore gender differences in reports of ADL disability. And we ultimately found that there are these very unique differences, gender differences or lack thereof, in different immigrant groups. And to add a racialization component, we actually include US-born individuals of different racial backgrounds as well. But as you can see, there's a notable disparity between Dominican men and women. And then we see these incredibly high rates of disability among Middle Eastern and former Soviet migrants. And we speculate that this is a refugee disadvantage in disability. And so the manuscripts I have in progress, I'm largely focusing on the HRS family of studies. Charles from China, Amhas from Mexico, Lassi from India, and doing cross-national comparisons with reports of disability in different contexts. And so I just want to give you a little sneak peek of some stuff I've been doing since the end of summer and right now. This first one is looking at urban and rural disability disparities. A lot of the literature focuses on rurality being this social disadvantage, and therefore urban individuals are generally quote unquote healthier. But ultimately what we did is compared reports of disability between urban and rural respondents in different countries. And as you can see here, for example, in Mexico, there is a rural disability disadvantage that can be explained by educational attainment. There is actually a urban disadvantage of disability in India that can be explained by comorbidities. And we broke this down we also did a supplemental test dichotomizing all the comorbidities, and it's actually hypertension that's explaining this urban-rural disparity. And then in China, there's a consistent rural disadvantage, which we speculate has something to do with the hukou system that exists in China. And then also working on another project, looking at gender disparities and visual difficulty among older adults. And this is just an age-adjusted prevalence figure, but we do see that the Western US informed literature suggests that women have this disadvantage in visual difficulty and also blindness. But we see that those rates differentiate across the world. And I don't have it here for you because we're still working on it. But after controlling for education, the difference in England is actually explained by education. However, when you control for education among the Mexican respondents, we actually see that men have a visual difficulty disadvantage. So this really shakes up the literature in terms of visual difficulty and what we know about gender disparities. And so my hopes are at PSC here is to really just tap into this HRS family of studies and do cross-national comparisons on disability and different aspects. I'd like to look at more sensory disabilities, given physical disability has been my thing for the most part. And then also contribute to emerging studies in aging. The longitudinal study of aging in Kenya, LOSHAC, is being hosted here at Michigan. And so I hope to help inform the development of that project. And also the Chitwan Valley family study in Nepal, hoping that to work on that, given that they want to escalate their aging component. And then also with immigrant health literature, I would still like to have a domestic line of literature, and I kind of see the immigrant health disparity as sort of an inverted version of what I do with the global comparisons, but really expand on these different immigrant groups that aren't generally mentioned in the literature, Middle Eastern, North African specifically. And again, as Andrew said, Metro Detroit being sort of the area where you want to be in testing differences. But I'd really like to look at how acculturation, English language proficiency, time spent in the US, age at migration, things of that nature inform disparities in disability and how that differentiates across groups. And so, my future goals are to have an externally funded program that focus on disability in a global context. Being that I'm from the area, hopefully maybe end up here at ISR longer term. And I really hope that this research informs the international agenda on disability, health, and wellness, given that it needs more attention. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everybody. So you've heard some brilliance and some excitement, and the synergies between some of the new postdocs are just so exciting for all of us. So if you want to chit chat with any of them, you can also find them on our website if you need their contact information later. But thank you so much for being here, and I can't wait to see you next week. And enjoy each other's company. Thank you.